going to tell you about his early life and information that I've gathered from several of you. And then other people are going to share their memories of a marvellous man. Alan was born and spent his early life in Merton. His father had been in the Navy during the war as an engineer. After this, he got a job at Smithfield Market, and that was specifically so that Alan could qualify to go to Christ Hospital School. At that time, you had to be a resident or work in the City of London. His father, although clever, had never had a good education because his father couldn't afford it, and he was therefore determined that his children should get one. His sister Marilyn, Alan's sister Marilyn, who was 3 years younger, also went to Putney High School, whereas Alan went to Christ Hospital. Alan was devoted to his mother and often spoke about her with great admiration. She was a secretary. She then bought a sweet shop in Merton. Alan used to help in the shop. The shop was really successful, and she bought 2 more shops. Eventually she sold all 3, and with the proceeds bought a hotel in St Ives, which she ran with Alan's father until his death. And after that, Marilyn and her husband took over the hotel. Alan's father died suddenly from a heart attack. He was a heavy smoker. And Alan's mother then married again and lived happily with her new husband in Mallorca for the last few years of her life. During the war, Alan was evacuated to Wales and lived with a miner's family. There were 2 older girls in the family who used to take Alan to unsuitable films. I can only imagine during the war what those were. But he had very happy memories of this time. Not so happy was the memory he has of being sent away to learn how to eat. He was a very small child at this time, so primary school age, and he was a very fussy eater. He was sent away to Chipping Norton. I've no idea why Chipping Norton, but anyway. As you know, it wasn't very successful, and he remained a fussy eater for his entire life. Although he was a very good cook, and he learnt that from his mother. But he wasn't really bothered whether he ate or not. Both Marilyn and Alan had horses. Alan's was called Blackie, and when he went to Christ Hospital, the horse was stabled nearby, and Alan would spend a lot of his free time riding Blackie, although this was strictly against school rules. He loved the music at school, particularly the organ voluntaries in chapel each day, and he sang in 3 choirs. Apparently, he spent a lot of time when he was at Christ Hospital in the library reading the Times, but did very little schoolwork, and he infuriated his teachers. There was general amazement, apparently, when he then got a scholarship to Guy's Hospital Dental School. Alan was nonetheless very thankful for his time at Christ Hospital School, and it's typical of his generosity that he has endowed a scholarship there. One possible clue to his later career was his love of Meccano as a child, which was a gift from his mother. He said that it taught him how to fit small parts together, a perfect training for an orthodontist. Alan met Meg on their first week studying dentistry at Guy's, and he says he knew straight away that they were meant for each other. He pursued her tenaciously. Apparently, she wasn't very impressed. But Alan won her over with charm and persistence, and he was devoted to her for over 50 years. The last 10 of those, Alan looking after Meg as she had Alzheimer's disease. Alan was a generous and loving person. He was particularly fond of cats, dogs, and beautiful women. No, not necessarily in that way. He and Meg had several Burmese and Siamese cats and a couple of badly behaved dogs. This included Otto the Doberman, that many of you may have met, who was apparently completely unruly and disgraced himself on more than one occasion. And when Otto misbehaved, Alan would usually take the side of the dog. Of the many people who've been in touch since Alan's death, the email from Yanni was typical. Yanni came from Brazil to the UK and stayed with Alan for many years. She said, I met Alan on my 5th day in the UK. I had no job, no money, and very little certainty I was going to achieve much in this country. He was the first person to believe in me, and throughout the years he did everything he could to help me get where I am now. So having told you a bit about his early life, there'll now be 2 people to describe his professional life. So I'm going to ask Ian McCormick, a very close friend and colleague of Alan's, to speak.
As Belinda said, Virginia has asked me to say a few words about Alan's professional life and about our long-standing friendship. Alan was my senior by 5 years, so although we were both undergraduates at Guy's Hospital, we did not overlap. But an exact contemporary of his tells me they vied for the top student prizes throughout the course. After qualifying, he took house jobs at Guy's and at East Grinstead, the latter a prestigious centre for oral surgery. He was awarded a fellowship in dental surgery by the Royal College of Surgeons, of which he was rightly proud. He purchased a general dental practice in Holland Park to make some pennies whilst Meg pursued her own specialist orthodontic training, and took time out to work in oral surgery in Stuttgart, where he became fluent in German. We first met in 1970 at the Eastman Dental Hospital, where he was studying for a diploma in orthodontics. It was a happy place to work, where professional and personal friendships were made that lasted a lifetime. Shortly after he gained his diploma in 1971, he acquired an orthodontic practice on the first floor at Queen Anne Street, where by chance I was working on the ground floor, where he stayed for the rest of his practicing life, expanding into the floor above when it became available. From a modest number of inherited patients in treatment, he built the practice into one of London's best, based on fine specialist skills, married to a sympathetic and accommodating manner. He inevitably ended up good friends with all his young patients, despite the necessary intraoral wire tweaking required. Older patients were equally appreciative. I know, as I said many to him, and vice versa. Sometime in the early 1980s, when we were not allowed to advertise, he was outraged to be contacted by the General Dental Council, accusing him of doing just that thing. It turned out, without ever contacting Alan, the author of that slim volume for the socially pretentious called The Sloane Ranger's Diary had recommended 2 orthodontists, one being Alan. The GDC eventually accepted his explanation, but not without a little unpleasantness. Far more outraged was he that he had never heard of the other orthodontists with whom he had been practicing. When computers first turned up, I was in awe of his rapid uptake of this new tool. At the time, his landlords were attempting to evict him so they could redevelop the building. But with a mail shot addressed to all his professional friends, encouraging them to write, the landlord backed down. He was a good delegator, an early enthusiast for treating patients in multiple chairs, and much loved by all those who worked for him. His success attracted many famous names to his practice. In 2003, he sold the practice and retired so he could the better look after Meg, who was increasingly affected by Alzheimer's. He had been a very fine practitioner. From our first meeting, we became the best of friends. His raw enthusiasm for anything new was infectious, and his capacity to take in knowledge on numerous subjects most impressive. He was impulsive but not dogmatic, and had great humour accompanied by that wide smile. He was excellent company. He learnt sailing from a mythical man called Orson, who I never met, but for whom Alan had the greatest respect. He bought a 31-footer called Banshee, a very sea-kindly cruiser racer, which he sailed around the Solent and occasionally further afield. On one such occasion, we took part in the Cowes Deauville race, more a rally than a race, but with the ultimate objective of getting to the casino for a slap-up dinner provided by the organisers. As we crossed the English Channel overnight, the wind was fair and on the same side all the way. Approaching Le Havre a bit after dawn, we had to tack to starboard. Meg was down below, sleeping comfortably on the lower side of the boat. When it promptly became the higher side, she rolled out of her berth, hitting her head on the base of the mast. Neither of us had warned her, so we were not very popular. An impressive hematoma developed on her forehead, which she declined to show in public, so we missed our feast. In 1978, he sold the boat and bought Pattendon's. With his usual energy, he reorganised the garden and added the structure of an old tide barn to the existing house. Shooting clays released over the fields from a trap at the back of the house was one of the attractions of lucky guests. Wine was another love, and he became a great connoisseur. The favourite was the semi-eponymous Lynch barge, otherwise known as Lynch bags for us. In those days, it didn't cost a king's ransom. He built up a good cellar in London in Pattendon's, and was a good cook too, so their dinner parties were much anticipated. Sadly unable to have children with Meg, their love was directed to many pets, which you have already been told of, so I won't repeat, except to say that their last dog was a black Labrador called Tess, which my wife was much involved in a transfer from locally, when it was discovered that she was not the slightest bit interested in shooting, but was very gratefully swapped that for a life full of domestic comforts at Pattendon's. Music featured large in his life. A good amateur pianist, he greatly appreciated music in all its forms, particularly opera. He was a member at Glyndebourne from early days, and we were very fortunate to join them for performances there almost every year from the mid-1970s. He loved his skiing holidays at Meg. Unfortunately, we never met on ski, but I can just imagine that his speed would have slightly exceeded his technique whilst racing to the next watering hole. After retirement, through Alan's love, patience and amazing care, Meg spent all but her last few days in their own homes. He met and married Virginia, that gave them some deserved and very happy years together and time to enjoy their mutual love of music and many other things. He too was spared having his last days in an institution through the loving care of Virginia. I last saw him at my daughter's wedding in July. As I walked through the porch into the church, bride on arm, he was directly ahead and gave the widest of smiles. Within 2 weeks he had died. I lost the truest of friends, but I shall remember that smile and much more forever.
And now I'm going to invite Vincent Barrett, another colleague of Alan's, to speak.
Well, good evening, everybody. I cannot claim to know Alan as well as many other people attending here today, so it is a special honour to me to be invited by Virginia to say a few words in Alan's memory. It was actually my father, Sidney, and Alan who were really good pals as they shared lunch pretty much every day throughout their practicing lives. They were both part of that Royal Society of Medicine luncheon set. I'm sure it would have been on one of those occasions, and probably dragged by my father like the reluctant teenager, I would have met Alan for the first time. From that point on, and whenever we met, I have this very strong recollection of someone who was warm, gentle, funny, and actually someone who a reluctant teenager could relate to. In fact, all the personal qualities for someone to make the brilliant orthodontist he was, having to deal with teenagers all day long. I grew very fond of him over the years. I would seek him out to chat to whenever we were invited to the same occasion. He was always full of stories. some of them rather mischievous, and my favourite one involved my father. Apparently, they both shared a love of cooking on the Arga stove, and one time had even attended a weekend cooking course together. Alan loved to set the scene as the two of them were surrounded by the other 15 female participants. Alan would giggle at my very traditional father, being horrified that these ladies might think of the two of them as a couple of old queens trying to improve on their sauces. Alan was a good storyteller and public speaker. I envied his ability to get to his feet and be amusing and thought-provoking, and I loved it when he did. The last occasion I heard him speak in public was here at the Athenaeum a few years ago. As a member here, Alan had been asked to tell the assembled gathering something about the club. He enchanted us with facts about this place, not least that there was a drawing room where nobody draws, a reading room where nobody reads, a smoking room where nobody smokes, a tea room where nobody drank tea, and so on. He delivered his short address with the usual eloquence and easy style that made his audience feel comfortable, amused, and relaxed. Alan was a man of all seasons. It must have been his compassionate and caring nature that allowed him to recognize the company he was in. Yes, he could joke and be a bit silly, but he had a serious side too. Like him, I benefited from an invitation to care for dignitaries in a far-off land. From his own wealth of experience, he was keen to make sure that I should avoid making mistakes, benefit from his know-how, and generally make the best of the situation. He went out of his way to invite me over for dinner at his home in St. John's Wood to pass on pearls of wisdom. Not only was it an excellent meal, but excellent advice, all revealed with openness and a generosity of spirit so characteristic of his personality. Alan was attentive and reassuring. He made you feel important and the focus of his concern. I remember as a new joiner of a dental group of which he was a member, I had to say a few words of thanks during the subsequent banquet. I barely got to my feet, knees are trembling, and with voice stuttering, said the words, "I thank you all for," when Alan's voice boomed out, "Bravo, young man. You can take a seat now. Well done." And I stand before all his loved ones this evening. In my nervous state, I miss him right now more than ever for that thoughtful gesture. Thank you.
Yeah, I think he'd make a rude joke right now, actually. And now, moving on from professional life, I'm going to ask Andrew Parkman, who's Meg's nephew, to talk about his relationship with Alan.
Hi everyone, good. Alan, or Uncle Alan, as I knew him, I was incredibly privileged to know him as Uncle Alan. He made me personally and professionally who I am today, following, well, not quite in his footsteps, but on towards dentistry. He took me to one side when I was thinking of becoming a medic, and showed me the way of how he and his friends did dentistry, as he would put it, the right way. That's you, Ian. By the time Alan had taken me to one side, he was working at the highest level in the dental elite, I think. My time, work experience with Alan and indeed with Ian for a day or so, which actually involved mainly, as Vincent was saying, lunching at the Royal Society of Medicine, did not quite adequately prepare me for coming out of the underground station at Whitechapel to then study at the Royal London Hospital. But Alan's incredible success was not only down to hard work, it was his passion and enthusiasm that he put both into his professional and his personal life. He loved his work, but as you've heard, he loved cooking, he loved to travel, and as you know, he loved his pets as well. We all know he shared a love of music, and this is how we've heard in the past how he met Virginia, and I'm very grateful to him to meet Virginia, because they had a wonderful time together over the last few years. When Virginia asked me to speak tonight about how I knew Alan, I began to think, and it became clear to me that I was lucky because I was involved in two sides of Alan's life. So firstly, I'd like to speak about him, about Alan, and how he was down in the countryside, in the place that he really loved, down in Pattendons. Well, the Parkmans would descend upon the Lynches every summer, and Alan would always have a project going, as you've heard. The barn, building of the barn, or putting up fences, or chopping down trees. Alan would roll up his sleeves and get stuck in whatever he was doing. And the nice thing is, he would involve all of us, my dad and us kids. And who wouldn't love an uncle who hands you a chainsaw or the steering wheel to a tractor? I hear what you're thinking, possibly not the safest thing to do with a 10 or 11-year-old. But as I said, he liked to get us involved. There were a few near misses. I remember my brother Tim deciding to take a shortcut on the tractor. Well, everybody knows that the faster you drive through a tight space, the easier it is. On one side of this particular tight space was the telegraph pole with the electricity to the entire house. On the other side was Alan's brand new Jaguar. So with inches to spare on either side, Tim took it at full pace. Bless him, Alan didn't even flinch. My dad, on the other hand, had a few choice words to say. Other than when I saw him at work, that was when he seemed the happiest. Leading from the front, sleeves rolled up, chopping down the trees, ripping up brambles. After all this activity, we were all ready to call it a day and put our feet up, but not Alan. This is when Alan would light up the barbecue and get on with the cooking, with exactly the same gusto as he'd done just ripping down a tree. Alan was a fantastic cook, and his signature barbecue dish was bananas wrapped in bacon with mustard. Anyone tried that with him? Anyway, it's one of our family favourites, even to this day. We'd also descend upon Pattendons at Christmas, where Alan could be found at his beloved Arga, with a glass of champagne, preparing a Christmas lunch with all the trimmings. He even made his own Christmas cake. It was the most delicious lunch. Alan, you made the most delicious mashed potato. It was the smoothest. Not a lump in sight. He would sieve it twice. Such was his gusto for everything. But here I have an apology to make, Alan. Because no matter how delicious the mashed potato, I still wanted the roasts. So I'm sorry. The next side of Alan was Alan's London life, which is possibly how most of you knew him, and how I came to know him later on in my life. He was very dapper. He wore the smart suits, went to the classical music concerts, to the operas, both at home and abroad. He was a member of clubs, the Athenaeum, the Dental Society of London, the American Dental Society of London, the Royal Society of Medicine, just to name a few. He took me along, at first as a guest, and later to some of the clubs as a member. We enjoyed fine wine, fine dining, and some great company. We had interesting and informative lectures, more than one of which was given by Alan. Perhaps Alan's London side is best summed up and seen reflected in the house in St John's Wood. When I stayed there as a student, I was not told that I could not go into the formal sitting room, but the carpet was white, as were the soft furnishings. The furniture was fine, and the ornaments from his world travels were expensive and fragile looking. Like his life in London, it was manicured and exquisite. So I kept out of that room. As I said, he played a huge part in making me who I am today. Being included in part of his life, I felt hugely privileged, like he had taken me under his wing. And as Vincent said, this was one of Alan's great skills, to wrap you up and bowl you along with him and his love and enthusiasm. He made you feel like you were taking part, not only that you were taking part, that you were an important part. And this is how it was when he worked. It was a real pleasure to watch him at work. He really came to life in his surgery, with his patients around him. You could see that they loved him and that he loved them too. But not only the patients, his staff, the nurses, they all did. And he told me that this was what made his job, for the patients, the love of the patients, and him loving the patients. And he said what a joy it was to treat interesting people whom he really liked. And I try to emulate him in this. And I thank him for introducing me to a job and a vocation that I love. There were signs of the more informal Alan from the countryside in St John's Wood. And we're going to go back to Otto for this, who some of you may remember. I remember very much Alan coming home every evening, and Otto's excitement at Alan coming home every evening. They loved each other. And Alan would go straight to a cupboard and he would pull out 3 packets of Quavers. For those of you who don't know, Quavers are cheese-flavoured crisps. He would then sit on the sofa and Otto would sit in front of him, and they would share 3 packets of Quavers. He'd sometimes feed him from his mouth. You know, that's nice. Having finished the crisps, Otto would then climb on the sofa and sit on Alan's lap, where he and Alan were happiest. Well, those are just some of the few stories that I think of when I think about Alan. I hope that later on that some of you will share some of your stories with me. So, in conclusion, Alan, in essence, a man with a huge passion for life, work, music, opera, travel, his family, and most of all, I think, his pets. A man with a big heart who inspired me and encouraged me. Thank you, Alan. What a privilege it was to know you, to call you uncle, and to call you my friend. Thank you.
And for those of you who didn't know, Otto was a Doberman, so he was large. And now Sophie McCormick, Alan's goddaughter, is going to speak.
I was blessed with having Alan as my godfather. He was someone I could talk to, and when I was small, he was my special friend that belonged just to me, so it was very important. He and Meg never forgot one birthday, Christmas, or even Easter when I was young, and I would get a charm bracelet for every time, and now it's a wonderful heirloom. He also did my braces. Poor him. They went on for years, but it did mean we saw each other every month, and we would always have such a giggle. He loved all his patients and the girls who worked for him. Alan always had a story. He had a funny one about Princess Diana. He went downstairs at Queen Anne Street one time to collect her, and as they were walking upstairs, there was a hell of a racket from some builders working next door, and he said, "Oh, sorry about the dentist next door, he's a bit noisy." So she replied, "I didn't know it was a dentist next door." It really made him laugh. He always had an anecdote, and he said, "You have to kiss a few frogs before you meet your prince, Sophie," which I did. Alan was amazing and managed to come to our wedding in the summer, even though he was so ill, which was thanks to Virginia and Belinda, and we are eternally grateful for them making sure he came. It would not have been the same without you both being there. It was just wonderful to see his lovely face as I walked up the aisle. Alan introduced me to a world of music and opera. One such concert, he was horrified when I said Prokofiev sounded like someone was bashing a load of saucepans together, and not very well at that. What a heathen I was. He made me go to loads more concerts until I learned the errors of my ways, which I eventually did. One day, Alan called me up and said, "Can you come to a concert? I want you to meet someone." Ooh, I was intrigued, and I met the lovely Virginia. He phoned me up the next day, and I said, "You need to get hold of Alan, she's great." And he did. He was so lucky to find you, Virginia. You were a true soul match, and he had so much in common with you. You gave him a family that he always wanted. It was great for him to spend time with your children and grandchildren. I can remember him phoning me up and telling me that you're all going to go skiing, and how he was going to teach you all. He was so overexcited. It was just lovely. Alan had so many talents, was so well read, and always had sage words and a hug for me. He loved his animals, and would get so excited at concerts, I would start jumping around too. He loved wine, and I really helped with that passion, though he always liked his white wine too warm. We could never agree on that. Sailing was another love, the countryside. He was also a fantastic cook, as you've all heard. His love for life was infectious. He was so incredibly kind and generous, and really was a mentor to my life. He always had a smile on his face. He seemed to sail through life and had so much empathy, even when times must have been really hard. He was like a second father to me, and probably the best godfather in the world. I cannot believe I will never hear his voice again, but I'm happy. Sorry. He's at peace now, and what a fantastically wonderful life he had.
So now I'd like to ask Alex Lennox to come and say a few words about the last few months of Alan's life.
Hi everyone. Nana's asked me to say something about the time I spent with Alan at the start of July of this year. I realise that mentioning what part of his life I'm here to talk about might sadden a lot of people, because we're here today to commemorate his life, not mourn his passing or the things that led to it. But to that end, I will say that the things that have really stuck with me about Alan across those 2 weeks wasn't the things that disease had taken away from him, but the things that it really couldn't. First was the huge amount of comfort and happiness he gained from being with Virginia. The first day I was there, I pretty much just messed up every important decision I had to make. I'm not a bad cook, but it remains the only time in my life I've somehow failed to make a cup of tea, a slice of toast and a boiled egg in one day. I was seriously useless, but the saving grace was Nana coming home, instantly alleviating any distress that my culinary failures had caused Alan to have. It cannot be overstated just how much of an aid Virginia was during that time. Another of these traits was his complete love and respect for people that he had never met. I first saw this out on day 2. I had realised that day 1 had mostly gone badly because of indecisiveness, so on day 2 I said to Alan, I'm sorry, but I need to go to the shops. There's some things I need and there's no way around it. And this turned out to be a great strategy because Alan, being very ill, understandably didn't like the idea of moving too much. But the idea of inconveniencing me, a person 60 years his junior, wasn't even an option. So every time he mustered energy from somewhere to come out with me. And once we were out, Alan, of course, interacted with everyone, with only a slight bias towards those with 4 legs. The fact that Alan, at that time, struggled to recall simple things, but still managed to produce a fresh one-liner for some random person he'd never met, honestly felt like I was witnessing a miracle. But of course, it wasn't a miracle, it was just a part of Alan that couldn't be altered. The only challenge left for me after that was thinking of things for us to do while we were indoors, which I'm sure makes a lot of you think, why not just put on some music? And the honest answer was that initially I somehow forgot. That was until day 3, when on our way back from the park, we passed a barber's that happened to be tuned into classical FM, and I still don't know what piece was playing, but Alan recognised the sound instantly and immediately brought us to a halt. And we sat and listened in the middle of the street for some 5 or 10 minutes because he couldn't be separated from the radio if he tried. From then on, my time with Alan quickly stopped being any effort at all. I bought a cable online so I could plug my phone into the speakers and play whatever we could think of to listen to. And of course, Alan loved the music, but as Sophie said, it arguably gave him more joy to be able to give me the musical education I was unaware that I needed. We even managed 3 operas in 7 days, all Wagner's, incidentally. Made all the more enjoyable through Alan's random bits of knowledge that again seemed to come out of nowhere. It was such quality time. By the end of the 2 weeks, I was sad to leave. And sadder still when it transpired I wouldn't get to spend any more time without him. But it is time and company that I will cherish forever.
It's such a pleasure to see all of you here and hear such wonderful things about Alan. Thank you, all the speakers, and thank you all for coming. This place, the Athenaeum, was very special to Alan. He felt very proud to be a member, and he and I had a lot of fun here. We went to a lot of wonderful dinners with sort of scintillating speakers. We played bridge up in this room. We sang carols in the room downstairs. We went to Christmas lunches in the basement. And we met so many friends. So it's kind of appropriate to have this evening's event here. As many people have mentioned, music was Alan's passion. And this is something I shared with him. In fact, we met at a concert. And our life was very much built around concerts. We lived in London very near the Wigmore Hall. We went to the E&O, we went to Covent Garden, we went to the Royal Festival Hall, and I learned so much about music from Alan. He was very good on opera, particularly Wagner, and I sat through 3 cycles of The Ring. And he knew a lot about opera and symphonic works. He didn't know a lot about chamber music, and fortunately I did. So I was able to teach him about chamber music, and particularly the violin repertoire. So we had a lot of joy with that. But the high spot of every year was the last weekend in June. And this was the Peace Marsh Festival. Alan and I had both been to this festival independently before we even knew each other, though we had caught a glance, and we both had sort of seen each other across a room. Now, this is a really unique festival. It takes place in just 4 days, the last weekend in June, in a tiny little Norman church in East Sussex. And there is 4 days of intense, brilliant music making that just overwhelms you and lasts with you practically the whole year. And in between each of the concerts, there's socialising, there's parties, there's endless things going on. So that weekend was very, very special to us. And we loved, towards the last 6 years of our time at Pattendon's, we had musicians, visiting musicians from the festival staying with us. And that was a joy, and having them rehearsing in our barn. So I'm particularly delighted that tonight, Richard Lester, who with Anthony Marwood is the artistic director of the Peace March Festival, is going to play to us to end this formal proceedings. And after Richard has played, we are all adjourned for supper.
Virginia has asked me to play a suite of dances by J.S. Bach. I know that Alan was very, very fond of Bach, and particularly fond of the Bach cello suites. So I tried to choose one which I felt would somehow most reflect him, his personality, and his joy of life. And the third suite in C major is probably the most life-affirming of them all. So that's what I will play to you tonight. It consists of a prelude, followed by 5 dances in various different French and German and Italian forms.